Tonight, we begin our journey into the shadows of the past, focusing on the sad, strange, and sometimes downright dangerous life of a man whose entire existence was dedicated to making everyone else laugh. The medieval court jester, the floppy hat, the vibrant colors, the jingling bells, the endless jokes. It all sounds like simple fun and games, a life of light-hearted amusement. That is, until you pull back the curtain and realize you were perpetually one poorly timed joke away from the dungeons, or worse. The laughter you commanded was not just your stage, it was your cage. So, before you settle in and get comfortable for tonight's exploration, please take a brief moment to like this video and subscribe to Medieval Nocturnes, but only if you genuinely enjoy the kind of quiet, deep histories we explore here. It helps our small corner of the past continue to grow. We'd also love to know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's always fascinating to see who is joining us for our nightly descent into history. Now, find your comfortable position, dim the lights, perhaps turn on a fan for that soft ambient hum, and let your mind drift away from the noise of the modern world. Let's ease into tonight's journey together, back to a time of stone castles, flickering torchlight, and the man who had to laugh for a living, whether he wanted to or not. So, you think you want to be a court jester? Too bad. In the medieval world, almost no one wanted to be a jester. It wasn't a career you trained for at a special school or a position you applied for with a carefully crafted resume of your wittiest remarks. It was something that simply happened to you, much like a sudden illness or being born left-handed in a world where everything, especially swords, was designed for the right. Most jesters didn't start their lives dreaming of juggling spoiled turnips in front of moody, unpredictable aristocrats. Instead, they were often chosen not for their ambition, but because of something that made them stand out, something unique about their very being. You might have had a pronounced limp, a hunched back, or a voice that was unusually high-pitched. Perhaps you were uncommonly clever, unnervingly strange, or just remarkably short. Whatever it was, one day a person of power, a lord, a duke, a king, pointed a finger in your direction and declared, "That one, he's funny looking, let's keep him." And just like that, congratulations. Your identity has been conscripted into service. Sometimes, your new life began with a single, accidental joke. You were a servant at a grand feast, and you slipped in a puddle of spilled mead. Or perhaps you muttered a joke about a rival baron just loud enough for your lord to overhear. A moment of genuine, unexpected laughter rippled through the high table. The next morning, you don't wake up in your cold, damp peasant hut. You're summoned to the castle, handed a brightly colored tunic and a fool's hat with bells, and given a new, permanent job description. Be entertaining forever. Other times, the process was far more direct and dehumanizing. You were simply purchased. Yes, bought and sold. Lords and nobles would sometimes collect jesters the same way they collected exotic animals from distant lands or oversized, jewel-encrusted goblets. If you were known in your village for being especially witty, or if you had a particularly strange appearance, you might be gifted from one court to another, passed along like a party favor, wrapped in layers of sarcasm and condescension. You didn't audition to be a jester. You were chosen the way a chicken is chosen for the stew pot, suddenly, and with absolutely no consultation. And from that moment, your life was no longer truly your own. You were now the designated laugh dispenser, a human novelty to be dragged out during long, droning feasts, summoned to break the tension during politically charged meetings, and paraded like a strange mascot whenever foreign diplomats came to visit. You couldn't say no. You couldn't simply walk away, not unless you had a burning desire to return to the back-breaking labor of the fields, or, far worse, be mistaken for a masterless vagrant and find yourself locked in the public stocks for the crime of merely existing. Because you have to understand, in the rigid hierarchy of the medieval world, a man without a job, without land, and without a clear purpose overseen by a lord was just asking to be arrested. Vagrancy was a serious offense. So yes, in theory, you are now an entertainer, a performer with a captive audience. But in reality, you are a hyper-sure low-pay, full-time joke machine, kept on retainer by powerful people who could legally have you whipped for telling a joke with the wrong timing. And that was just how the audition worked. You may not be on a grand stage with a spotlight following your every move, but make no mistake, in the medieval court, you are always performing. Being a jester is not a job you clock into and out of. It is your entire existence. You eat, you sleep, and you breathe among the nobility, but you are never, ever truly one of them. You are their entertainment, their living curiosity, their walking what-if scenario. You are, in essence, the court's emotional support oddity. You are never allowed to be invisible. From the moment you wake to the moment you collapse into sleep, everyone sees you, and they expect something from you the instant your eyes meet theirs. A joke, a clumsy twirl, a clever insult directed at someone else's expense. Even when you are not officially summoned to perform for the court, you are still being watched. Walking through the great hall, you'd better add a comical strut, passing the queen's table at supper. You'd better offer a wink or an ironic curtsy. Sit alone in a corner for 5 seconds, and someone will inevitably call out, "Why isn't the fool being foolish?" And heaven forbid you show a glimmer of real, authentic, human emotion, sadness that makes the nobles uncomfortable, anger that is seen as dangerous, quiet reflection that is deeply suspicious. If you are not grinning like an idiot while balancing on one foot, they will automatically assume you are either ill or worse, planning some form of treason. Your face does not belong to you anymore. It belongs to their expectation of amusement. Worse still, you live within the palace walls, but you do not live like a prince. You sleep somewhere tucked away near the sweltering heat of the kitchens, or in a spare closet that was once used to store old brooms. Your quarters are just close enough to hear all the boisterous laughter from the great hall, but never close enough to be included in it. You eat what is left over from the main feast. You wear the mismatched garish clothes that are given to you. You exist as a fixture of fun, not as a person with needs. And if someone important is bored, drunk, or just generally irritable, guess who gets summoned to fix it? You. If a nobleman's hunting party came back empty-handed, if the wine cellar suddenly ran dry, if the king's favorite dog coughed in a way that sounded strange, someone is inevitably coming to knock on your tiny door at midnight with a sharp command. Do something amusing. You are not allowed to be. You are only allowed to entertain. This means the line between your true self and your public persona gets so blurry, so faded, that you begin to forget who you were before the bells, the jokes, and the endless, aching, forced smiles. In the medieval court, you don't just wear the fool's costume, you become the costume. And trust me when I say this, the show never, ever ends. Being a jester sounds fun even enviable, until you grasp the crushing reality that you are required to be funny constantly. You do not get to be off. You do not get quiet days where you can simply reflect. You do not get to have moods, at least not any that are visible to others. Your entire identity, your very reason for being allowed to draw breath within the castle walls, is expected to be one single, endless laugh track, no matter what else is happening in the world or inside your own weary mind. Your job description is simple and brutal. Be hilarious on demand. Even if the Duke just buried his third wife and the entire court is draped in black mourning cloth. Even if the kingdom is on the brink of a catastrophic war and soldiers are marching past the castle gates. Even if you personally woke up with a raging toothache and a sense of morale so crushed it feels like a physical weight on your chest. None of it matters. You are still expected to juggle, to tell a clever pun, or to fall flat on your face with theatrical grace. No pressure, right? And don't even think about reusing your old jokes. These are nobles, after all, with a ravenous appetite for novelty and a short attention span. They want fresh entertainment, delivered daily. That witty poem you secretly worked on for a week, perfecting every rhyme and rhythm. That was wonderful. Now, they expect 12 more, just like it, before the midday meal. And while you're at it, could you also convincingly impersonate 3 different visiting courtiers, write a biting satire of the bishop's latest sermon, and pretend to trip over a goose that isn't there? If you bomb, you are not just getting a bad review from the audience. You are getting jeered at, slapped across the face, and quite possibly pelted with leftover chicken bones from the feast table. Or worse, you could be replaced. Medieval courts did not have human resources, departments, or employee protection laws. If you fail to amuse the wrong person on the wrong day, your next gig might involve cleaning out the castle's chamber pots with your bare hands, or, in some cases, digging your own grave. Remember, in a room full of powerful people, you are the only one not allowed to be serious. Everyone else can cry, rage, pray, scheme, or fall apart emotionally. But you are the one who juggles through the suffocating tension. You are the one who has to laugh your way through a king's royal tantrum. You are the one who must dance around delicate political intrigues with a ridiculous, floppy hat on your head and a painful, forced smile plastered on your face. You can never, ever say, "I'm just not feeling it today." Your feelings are fundamentally irrelevant. Your entire value, your very survival, depends on how many chuckles you can wring from a room full of people who often think sarcasm is a form of foreplay and casual cruelty is the highest form of wit. You are their emotional release valve, and your own feelings must be sacrificed to keep the mechanism working. So yes, being the funny one sounds wonderful in theory, but when your life and livelihood depend entirely on your ability to entertain people who could legally execute you for a bad punchline, it is less like performing stand-up comedy and far more like being a medieval emotional hostage. The ransom is laughter, and you pray every single day that you can afford to pay it. In a medieval court, the line between what is considered funny and what is considered offensive is razor-thin, and as the jester, you are expected to tiptoe across it blindfolded while juggling insults. Your job is to mock, to tease, and to comment on everything and everyone around you, the king, the queen, the clergy, the honored guests, but never too harshly, never too directly, and most importantly, never, ever, at the wrong moment. One misplaced quip, about the king's expanding waistline, or a light-hearted jab at the lord's fourth marriage, and suddenly you are not the funny man anymore. You are the fool who finally crossed a line. And here is the real, terrifying kicker. That line is constantly moving. On Monday, the queen might laugh hysterically when you make a joke about her cousin's terrible gambling habits. On Tuesday, however, her cousin is in the room, and now that same joke is considered treasonous slander. On Wednesday, she laughs at it again, but perhaps a little too loudly, and the king looks displeased by the spectacle. On Thursday, you are being unceremoniously escorted out of the great hall by two stone-faced guards for disturbing the peace of courtly decorum. There is no safe zone, not really. Jokes about politics, extremely risky. Jokes about religion, suicidal. Jokes about the physical appearances of the nobles, very, very dangerous territory. And jokes about royal failures, absolutely not. Unless, that is, you can wrap your critique in 3 thick layers of metaphor, a riddle, and a convincing juggling routine. Even then, it's probably best to just stay quiet. Some of the most skilled jesters developed a complex art of speaking truth through absurdity. They would couch their social criticism in confusing riddles, elaborate double meanings, and clever animal fables. The rooster with the sharpest tongue and no eggs of his own might want to crow a little less in the morning. You might say, hoping with every fiber of your being that the childless, loud-mouthed king laughs at the image instead of ordering your execution. But it is a gamble, always. If the noble you are mocking happens to be in a foul mood, that is, your neck on the line. If the bishop thinks your joke even slightly implies that he is greedy, that is, blasphemy, a sin punishable by fire. If the rest of the court suddenly turns against you, the very same people who were roaring with laughter just moments before will suddenly clutch their pearls, gasp in feigned shock, and pretend they never found you amusing in the first place. And do not for a second expect anyone to defend you. The jester is not a protected class. You are not clergy who are shielded by the church. You are not nobility who are protected by their bloodline. You are a fool with a license to speak freely, a license that can be revoked instantly and violently with a single angry glare from the man on the throne. Some jesters who misread the room were whipped in the courtyard as a lesson to others. Some were banished from the kingdom, sent out into the world with nothing but the ridiculous clothes on their back. Some were quietly hanged, others were simply retired, which, in medieval terms, often meant being buried somewhere remote without the dignity of a funeral. So yes, your humor was your weapon, the only tool you had to carve out a place for yourself in this dangerous world. But it was also your noose, dangling precariously above your head at all times. In the royal court, timing was everything. Missed the beat, and you might just lose your head. Before you even open your mouth to speak, the room is already laughing, not at your wit, but at what you are forced to wear. As a medieval jester, your wardrobe is not designed for dignity. It is not made for comfort or for style. It is made, very deliberately, to humiliate. The moment you step into the torchlight of the great hall, your entire outfit screams one single, undeniable thing. I am not a real person. I am a walking punchline. Let's start with the hat, the famous coxcomb. It is a multicolored, flopping, horned monstrosity, often with little bells attached to the very tips. Bells, not because they add anything meaningful to your performance, but because the nobles want to hear you coming from a distance, like a walking wind chime of low self-worth. It announces your arrival and your status simultaneously, a jingle of subservience that precedes you into every room. Then there is your tunic, a chaotic checkerboard of clashing colors that no sane tailor would ever combine on purpose. Bright yellow and royal blue, jarring red and garish green, all sewn together in bright, mismatched patches, like a tapestry created by someone who actively hates your dignity. Your tights are often just as mismatched, one leg a different color from the other, ensuring that you look asymmetrical and unbalanced at all times. Your shoes are no better. They are often curled-toe slippers, flimsy and impractical, and yes, they frequently have bells on them too. They are perfect for slipping on spilled mead or for tripping over your own feet with comical, unintended grace. They make you look like a court-approved goblin, which, frankly, is entirely the point. Even your belt is a joke, often oversized or knotted in ways that prevent any practicality. Need to carry a knife for your food or a small pouch? Forget it. You are not here for practical matters. You are here to jiggle, dance, and fall on your face in a glorified mascot uniform. And while the nobles around you are draped in soft velvet, shimmering silk, rich fur, and gold thread embroidery, your clothes are made from the cheapest, coarsest scraps of wool and linen. If the fabric is itchy, uncomfortably heavy, or permanently stained, that's even better. The worse the costume feels on your skin, the better it looks to the audience. They must always be reminded that you are beneath them, a creature of rags and patches in a world of wealth and splendor. Now, imagine wearing this exact outfit to every single event, every feast, every wedding, every somber royal negotiation. There is no variation. There is no formal Jester, where for important occasions, you are visually ridiculous, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Even if you are trying to have a serious conversation, you look like a coloring book that has violently exploded all over your body. People do not say, "That's a nice hat." They say, "Try not to trip over your own bells today, fool." Or worse, they will physically tug on your sleeve as you pass, just to hear you jingle, treating you like a holiday decoration with deep-seated abandonment issues. Your clothes are an invitation for mockery, a visual permission slip for others to treat you with contempt. So yes, your clothes might be iconic to us now, but for you, they were a uniform of perpetual humiliation. They were a constant, physical reminder that even when your words were sharp, your outfit had to be dull-witted enough to reassure everyone in power that you were never truly a threat. You were just an amusing echo, jingling in a funny hat. You sleep under the same magnificent roof as dukes, barons, and kings. You breathe the same air, warmed by the same grand fireplaces. But make no mistake, you are not one of them. You are simply a part of the castle's furniture, like a strange talking tapestry that occasionally makes noise. Your physical proximity to power is a constant, cruel illusion, designed to remind you of everything you can see, but will never, ever have. Your room, if you are lucky enough to be granted one, is a glorified storage closet. It's a small, windowless space, tucked away behind the bustling heat of the kitchens, or nestled near the servants' quarters. It is a space strategically placed just far enough away to remind you that you are not important, yet just close enough to be dragged out at a moment's notice for a midnight joke or an awkward, impromptu toast at a wedding feast you weren't truly invited to. At meals, you do not sit with the nobles at the long, magnificent table. You stand near them, orbiting the feast like a bright, jingly satellite of shame. You are close enough to overhear their gossip, to be insulted in the middle of their bites of roasted boar, or to have a piece of chicken flung playfully at your head in jest. You might be allowed to eat from the same lavish platters, but you always eat last, after the nobles, after the priests, after the king's favorite hunting dogs, and occasionally after the stable boy has had his fill. And yet, because of this strange position, you hear everything: the whispered affairs, the clandestine plots, the murmured insults, the unvarnished truth behind royal marriages and political treaties. You are the unwanted ear in every room, the one person nobody stops talking around, because, in their minds, you are too lowly to matter. You are harmless. You are just a fool. But that assumption doesn't stop you from knowing all their secrets. Sometimes, that knowledge is what keeps you alive. Other times, it is what could get you killed. The irony of your position is exquisitely cruel. You live among the highest echelons of nobility. You know their most intimate secrets, and you share their meals. But socially, you are utterly and completely stranded. You exist in a lonely limbo, a social no man's land. The nobles will never truly befriend you. You are their plaything, not their peer. The servants, meanwhile, will never fully trust you. You are too close to the masters, and they fear your tongue. You are too high up in the castle to belong to the world of the servants, but you are far too low to ever be accepted by the world of the lords. Your presence is tolerated, but it is never, ever respected. You are allowed into sacred spaces that peasants could never dream of seeing, but only for as long as you remain amusing. You are patted on the head like a performing animal, not welcomed into the fold like a guest. If you ever dare to speak too plainly or ask for something real, a favor, a bit of protection, a shred of genuine respect, you are reminded immediately and often harshly. Know your place, fool. You are, quite literally, a resident outsider. You can mimic the court, you can mock the lords, you can entertain the ladies, but you will never inherit land, marry into a noble family, or wear a sword for the sake of honor. Your future is as fixed as the bells on your hat. So yes, you live with the nobles, but you live among them the way a shadow lives among light, always present, but never truly visible. You have spent years, perhaps your entire life, honing your skills. You can juggle daggers with a blindfold on, recite witty verse in 3 different languages, play the lute with a skill that could make angels weep, and compose biting satire that could rival the greatest Roman poets. And yet, in the eyes of the court, no one thinks of you as talented. They only think of you as amusing. That is the quiet, soul-crushing curse. No matter how much skill, creativity, or performance mastery you possess, your genius is constantly and deliberately treated like a cheap party trick. You compose a set of clever rhymes, perfectly structured and delivered with flawless timing. The court will chuckle, and then the Lord will say, "Very good, fool. Now do the funny face again." You craft a brilliant piece of political commentary disguised as a simple joke about sheep. Someone throws a grape at your head and tells you not to get too clever for your own good. You are expected to be brilliant, but you are never, ever, to be acknowledged as such. If a visiting noble sings a song slightly off-key, the entire hall erupts in polite applause. If you sing the same song, but better and with perfect pitch, the room often goes uncomfortably silent. If a baron tells a clumsy joke, it is praised for its boldness. If you tell the same joke, but with sharper wit. It is called sassy, impertinent, or inappropriate. And woe unto you if you actually, truly outshine someone important. Nobles do not like being upstaged, especially not by someone dressed like a mismatched Christmas ornament. You are supposed to sparkle for their amusement, not eclipse their own fragile egos. So you learn to play a strange, exhausting game. You must perform just well enough to keep your job, but not so well that you make anyone in power feel inferior. You must learn to be witty, but never truly wise. Be sharp, but never threatening. Be brilliant for a fleeting moment, and then immediately follow it up by juggling something poorly, just to remind everyone that you are not, in fact, all that clever. It is a constant, draining balancing act, performed on the very edge of a sword. Herein lies the real tragedy of your profession. Many jesters throughout history were incredibly skilled individuals. They were gifted musicians, nimble acrobats, profound poets, and sharp political thinkers, all forced to hide their true intelligence behind a mask of cheerful idiocy. Because, in the medieval court, brilliance in a fool's mouth is only ever tolerated if it comes with a clumsy pratfall and the jingle of bells. Do you know what is worse? They often laugh the hardest when you genuinely mess up. If you miss a punchline, if you trip in the middle of a dance, if your lute string snaps mid-song, that is when they truly roar with delight. Not because you meant to be funny, but because your failure reinforces what they desperately want to believe, that you are, at your core, just an idiot in a loud outfit, and not someone clever enough to be mocking them in their own tongue. So yes, your talent may be the most refined and impressive in the entire room, a secret flame of genius that you nurture in the dark. But the applause you receive for it, if it comes at all, will only ever come wrapped in condescension. Feasts in a medieval court are grand affairs. Glistening roasts of pork and swan are paraded through the hall. Wine goblets overflow with dark red vintages, and minstrels pluck away at their lutes in the background. It is a festival of excess, a celebration of power and wealth. And you, the court jester, are the main course of humiliation. From the moment the first noble guests arrive, they are eyeing you like a new toy they can poke for a laugh. Do a trick, fool, one will shout. Tell us a joke, demands another. Imitate Lord Wensley and his lazy eye. A third will command with a cruel grin. You perform not because you want to, but because the collective mood of 100 powerful and soon-to-be drunken nobles depends entirely on your ability to not take offense while being publicly mocked, grabbed, teased, and possibly slapped for their amusement. You do not sit at the magnificent table. You orbit it like a bright, jingly satellite of shame, moving from one group to another, a courtly Roomba designed to clean up awkward silences with a clever line or a badly timed handstand. You are always available, but never truly invited. And when the wine starts flowing heavily, that's when things invariably turn for the worse. Suddenly, your performance becomes a participatory game for everyone else. Someone might sneak up behind you and pull your hat down hard over your eyes, blinding you. Another will loudly demand a pig impression, right here and now. Someone else, feeling particularly boisterous, throws a heavy leg bone at you from across the table and roars with laughter when you flinch or stumble to avoid it. Because here is the thing you must understand. At a feast, you are not just entertainment. You are a social punching bag. You are a living safety valve for the elite. Nobles and knights cannot openly insult each other without risking a duel or a political incident. but they can all safely and gleefully insult you. And so they do, constantly. They mock your clothes, your voice, your background, and your very worth as a human being. They do this not necessarily because they hate you, but because you are convenient. Because laughing at the lowly jester makes everyone else feel a little smarter, a little richer, and a little safer in their own precarious positions. You are the one joke in the room that holds the entire fragile social system in balance. So, you smile, you take it, you keep the laughter going no matter what, because the alternative is silence. And in the tense atmosphere of a medieval court, silence is dangerous. Silence means the mood sours. Silence means the collective attention shifts. And the last thing you ever want is for the spotlight of a drunken lord's irritation to land on someone more important than you, and for him to find you unfunny in the process. Thus, you are at every feast, but you are never celebrated. You are consumed, just like the bread and the wine, swallowed up by the room's need for amusement, and then utterly forgotten by the time the goblets are cleared away and the tables are bare. And when everyone else finally stumbles off to their warm, comfortable beds, full and satisfied, you shuffle back to your tiny, closet-sized room. You go not with a full belly, but with bruised ribs from an overly friendly shove and a sore, aching smile that was never your own. By day, you are the court jester, a fool who flings jokes, juggles apples, and takes verbal punches like a trained clown in a velvet-lined cage. But by night, or in the quiet, fire-lit moments between the noise, you become something else entirely. You become a weapon. The crown might laugh at your clumsy, tumbling act in public, but in private, they know your real value is not in your slapstick. It is in your ears. You see, being the fool comes with a strange and dangerous perk. You are essentially invisible in plain sight. Nobles, confident in their superiority, speak freely around you as if you are not there. Servants, busy with their duties, often forget you are in the room. Visiting guests, full of wine and frustration, might vent their true feelings, while you are the one quietly pouring their next goblet. You drift from one corner of the castle to another, like furniture with feet catching everything. You hear the whispers that were never meant to be heard, the hints of treason murmured between two ambitious cousins, the details of a secret affair confessed over a shared flagon of ale, the hushed talk of bribes, threats, and shifting alliances that form in the deep shadows of the feast hall. And you remember it all, not because you are particularly nosy, but because your very survival depends on it. Because sometimes, late at night, the king himself calls you aside. With no one else around, his face is not amused, but hard as stone. He says, "Fool, tell me what the bishop truly said to the French envoy last night, and you had better have the answer. If you do not, he might think your loyalties lie with someone else. If you do, he will trust you, but he will also undoubtedly ask for more information in the future. This is the terrible dance you must perform. The king wants the truth from your lips, but only the truths that do not implicate him or inconvenience his plans. You serve a monarch who praises your honesty right up until the moment your honesty offends him. You are expected to report back, quietly, cleverly, perhaps even in the form of a riddle. Who is sleeping with whose wife? Or which baron is plotting a little light rebellion over his evening stew? You are the court's most dangerous informant, disguised as the least dangerous person in the room. But there is a catch. Everyone else in the court knows it, or at least suspects it. The lords and ladies smile at you during the day, but they do not trust you. The servants stop talking the moment you walk by. The castle guards eye you not as a fool, but as someone who might be holding a hidden dagger behind their back. And in a way, you are. Your weapon is information, and information, in the paranoid, backstabbing world of a medieval court, is just one sharp joke away from being absolutely deadly. You are feared just as much as you are ridiculed, a walking contradiction of power and powerlessness. So you are always listening, always watching, always carefully choosing which truth to tell and which one to bury beneath a harmless, silly punchline. Because in a world full of swords and secrets, you learn that the most dangerous blade is not the one forged from steel. It is the one tucked away, unseen, behind a fool's empty grin. In the grand theater of the medieval court, your sworn duty is to keep every single other person laughing. This duty remains unchanged, even when you, yourself, are quietly falling apart on the inside. Your own feelings are not part of the performance. In fact, they are a direct threat to it. Your heart must be a secret, locked away, while your face is a mask of public joy. Did your only friend, a stray dog you fed scraps to, pass away in the night? It does not matter. The queen still expects you to make a clever joke about her cousin's ridiculous new wig. Have you come down with a bonnicking fever, your head pounding with every beat of your heart? Too bad. The Duke had a bad hunting day, and he needs a good laugh before he decides to throw his plate at a servant. Is your own heart broken over a love you can never have? Keep dancing, fool. This is a wedding, and your sorrow is not on the guest list. You quickly learn that you are not allowed to have feelings unless they are funny ones. Sadness is seen as selfish. Anger is blatant insubordination. Fatigue is nothing more than laziness. Anything short of cheerful, relentless absurdity is treated as a personal betrayal of your one and only function. The court does not see you as a person with a soul, with scars, and with a history. They see you as a piece of talking furniture designed to dispense jokes. You are expected to absorb everyone else's moods and reflect absolutely none of your own. You must sit through the drunken tirades of angry lords, endure the mocking laughter of cruel ladies, tolerate the passive-aggressive insults of visiting dignitaries, and smile through it all, even as the occasional flying chicken leg comes sailing past your head. Your inner world is irrelevant. Your outer performance is everything. Sometimes you perform while you are grieving. Sometimes you perform while you are physically ill. Sometimes you perform while silently, desperately begging the universe to just let you disappear behind a tapestry and cry for 5 blessed, uninterrupted minutes. But there is no tapestry thick enough to hide behind, no moment of true privacy. You are always, always on. The very idea of vulnerability does not fit inside your colorful, foolish costume. And here is the cruelest twist of all. When the nobles do happen to notice that you are down, they do not ask what is wrong. They do not offer a moment of comfort. Instead, they say, "Why aren't you being funny today?" Or, even worse, they will turn to one another and whisper, "Maybe the fool has finally lost his wits. Shall we find a new one?" So what do? You learn to turn your pain into your performance. You make your own heartbreak the punchline of a joke. You learn to laugh first and louder than anyone else before they can laugh at your weakness. You build a fortress of wit and sarcasm around your exhaustion. and you do not let a single person see what is inside. Because the moment they realize the fool is human, the illusion shatters, and so does your job. So yes, you had feelings. You just learned how to bury them deep under a mountain of bells and jokes, just as everyone expected you to. Because in the royal court, when everyone else gets to feel things, the fool is the one who must pretend that nothing hurts at all. Medieval kings were not, as a general rule, known for their emotional stability. One bad dream, one spoiled roast, one poorly timed sneeze from a foreign diplomat, and the entire mood of the court could shift like a heavy thundercloud with a crown. And guess who every single person in the hall would look at the moment? The king furrowed his royal brow or frowned deeply into his goblet of wine. You. Because if the monarch is not smiling, then clearly the fool is not doing his job. It does not matter that you were up until dawn performing at a feast, or that your voice is hoarse from singing satirical songs, or that you already told 12 genuinely clever jokes this morning that earned chuckles from 3 nights and a cook. If the king wakes up irritable, the entire court looks at you as if you personally ruined his breakfast. You are not just the jester. In these moments, you become the court's emotional insurance policy, and the premiums are paid with your sweat and fear. Did a crucial trade negotiation with a neighboring kingdom fail? The king's advisors will mutter amongst themselves, perhaps the fool did not do enough to lighten the tension in the room. Did the queen scowl during morning mass? A lady-in-waiting might whisper, maybe the jester made a joke in poor taste earlier. Did the king himself stub his toe on a loose chamber pot? The steward will glare at you and ask, has the fool been leaving his things about again? Sometimes the blame is subtle, communicated through a snide comment or a disapproving glare from across the hall. Other times, it is terrifyingly direct. The king will lock eyes with you, his face a mask of thunder and command. Entertain me, fool. I am in a foul mood, and your head is in the balance. And you know, with chilling certainty, that he is not kidding. You are one ill-timed silence away from being demoted to a stable cleaner, or, worse, being executed for the crime of being unfunny. And even when the tension in the room is not your fault, it always becomes your burden to fix. You must instantly repair the mood, patch the tension, and make the royal toddler laugh so that no one pays too much attention to the fact that the king just broke a priceless goblet over the head of a trembling steward. You become a human emotional thermostat, endlessly adjusting your own performance and energy so that everyone else in the room stays warm and content. But here is the thing, no one ever thanks you for it. If the king's mood does improve, the court decides it is because his wine was particularly strong that day. If he finally laughs, it is because he remembered a joke someone else told him earlier, not you. His good humor is his own achievement. If he does not laugh, however, you are at fault. Your jokes were weak, your timing was off, your energy was lacking. Either way, you lose. Your success is invisible, but your failure is a public spectacle. So yes, in a court drowning in paranoia and high-stakes politics, you, the humble jester, are somehow both completely irrelevant and entirely responsible for the mood of the most powerful man in the kingdom. And if he does not laugh, you had better start praying, because no one else will be praying for you. You may live in the castle, wear a hat with bells, and even share private jokes with kings. But make no mistake about your situation. You are not free. In fact, in many ways, you are more trapped than the lowest peasant tilling the fields. Because being a medieval court jester is not just a job. It is an identity that completely and utterly consumes you, a brand seared onto your soul from which there is no escape. Once you are labeled the fool, that is it. That is who you are for the rest of your life. There is no promotion on the horizon. There is no career change waiting for you. There is no moment where you can go to the Lord and say, "I've enjoyed my time as court jester, but I'd like to try something different now." You are a lifelong performer, whether you want to be or not. It does not matter if you are growing older, your bones aching with every forced tumble. It does not matter if you are tired, your mind weary from the endless pressure to be witty. It does not matter if you are sick, you do not get to retire. There is no pension fund for fools, no cozy little cottage waiting for you at the edge of the kingdom. You do not get to become a respected elder, a merchant, or a monk. You are not master whatever your namus to be. You are still just the fool, only now you are slower, sadder, and have fewer teeth. And the worst part is that even if you possess a brilliant mind, no one will ever be able to see past the hat. You might secretly write beautiful poetry in the dead of night. You might speak 4 different languages fluently. You might secretly know more about statecraft and military strategy than half the royal council. But when you speak, all anyone else hears are the jingling bells, and all they expect are pratfalls. You could warn the king of an impending war and be ignored, but if you slip on a turnip, they will talk about it and laugh for hours. You have become a costume with a voice. And what if you try to leave? Good luck. You are not trained in any practical trade. You own no land. You have no connections or family outside the castle walls. Who would dare to take you in? If you simply wander into a town, you are not seen as that sharp-witted performer from the royal court. You are just a strange, poorly dressed man babbling about dukes and drama, and you will likely be mistaken for a madman or a common vagrant and thrown in a cell. Even if you did manage to leave and somehow survive on the outside, what then? You would miss meals. You would be forgotten. And sooner or later, some lesser noble at a boring feast will say, "You know, I miss the old fool. He made us laugh." And just like that, an order would be sent out, and you would be hunted down and dragged back, because you are not a man who can resign. You are an object, a piece of property that people remember when they grow bored. So, you stay, you perform. You learn to laugh at your own pain, because the alternative is far more terrifying. The known gilded cage of the castle is safer than the unknown wilderness outside its walls. Because once you are the fool, you stay the fool forever. Here is the strangest thing about being the fool. In a room filled to the brim with powerful nobles, pious bishops, and decorated knights, you might just be the only person in the entire castle who is allowed to speak the truth. Everyone else in the royal court speaks in carefully constructed riddles of their own. Diplomats flatter, courtiers scheme, and servants lie simply to survive another day. But you, the jester, you have been granted one strange, dangerous privilege. You can say what others cannot even dare to think. You can openly mock a military policy that the king refuses to reconsider, a policy that everyone knows is failing. You can whisper jokes that directly call out the corruption of a local magistrate. You can perform a flawless, cutting impersonation of the baron who is clearly embezzling grain from the royal stores, or the duchess who has a suspiciously close friendship with the bishop's young nephew. And somehow, against all logic, you can get away with it. But let's be perfectly clear. Getting away with it does not mean that you are safe. It means that you are walking on a high wire, strung precariously between the pillars of comedy and execution. The court laughs at your audacity, not just because the joke is funny, but because they are all pretending together that it is just a joke. But you know the truth, and so do they. It is never just a joke. That jest you made about the long, pointless war. That is a political opinion in disguise. That clever pun you delivered about the crippling new taxes. That is public dissent, delicately wrapped in a layer of wordplay. In this suffocating atmosphere of flattery and fear, you are the only honest voice in the room, and everyone knows it. And that simple fact terrifies them. Some of the courtiers will admire you for it, quietly and from a distance. Others will hate you for it, openly and with a venomous glare. But all of them, without exception, will watch your every word, waiting for you to finally make a mistake. They wait for that one joke that cuts a little too sharp, that one truth that hits a little too close to home. Because they know that the same crown that once chuckled at your cleverness may have your head rolling across the cold stone tiles by morning. In a world where saying the wrong thing could get anyone else imprisoned or exiled, you, the jester, were the court's built-in truth serum, but a serum that came with absolutely no protection for the one who administered it. You are the moral mirror for the court, the kingdom's conscience dressed in bells and motley. You are allowed to point at the naked emperor, but only so long as you do it with a theatrical backflip and a silly voice. But if your truth cuts too deep, or if the king happens to be in a particularly fragile mood that day, well, jesters have been silenced before, swiftly and permanently. So yes, in a court built on a foundation of secrets and lies, your job is to shine a flickering lantern into the darkest shadows, and then pretend it is all just a silly spotlight gag. Because sometimes, the only one brave enough to speak the truth is the one man everyone has already agreed to never take seriously. You spend your entire life surrounded by people. You are a fixture at every feast, wedding, coronation, and sometimes even at funerals. Your voice echoes in the great stone halls, and your jokes fill royal chambers with fleeting moments of laughter. And yet, when your own time comes to an end, it is almost certain that no one will be there. The jester's life is filled with endless noise, but his death is usually profoundly and deeply silent. You die in a corner room, the same small, forgotten closet you were given to live in. Your passing goes unnoticed, unmourned. There is no solemn parade through the castle courtyard for you. There is no priest to deliver a grand eulogy, no marble slab to be etched with your cleverest, most biting line. You do not get remembered in the annals of history like a knight, nor are you immortalized in songs like a heroic bard. You are not written into family histories. You are just gone. Maybe, years later, the old cook will be telling a story and mention you in passing. Remember that fool who used to dance like a frantic goat whenever the wine was served. Maybe a new, younger jester will find your old, tarnished bells in the bottom of a drawer and not even bother to ask whose they were. Or maybe, and most likely, no one remembers you at all, because your replacement was hired before your bed even had a chance to grow cold. You were not a person to them. Not really. You were a sound, a color, a flicker of momentary amusement. You were a replaceable, disposable commodity. The very thing that made you valuable in life, your ability to disappear behind a joke and a silly costume, is the same thing that ensures you are completely forgotten in death. You were a function, and that function has ceased. You never marry. You never have heirs to carry on your name. You never own land or build a legacy of your own. Your entire life was spent making everyone else feel more important, more grand, more powerful, but you leave no tangible mark on the world yourself. Even your closest friend in the court, perhaps the steward who once genuinely laughed at your perfect imitation of the bishop, will not visit your grave. If you are even given one, in the final quiet indignity, you might be buried outside the hallowed churchyard, because fools were not always considered holy enough for consecrated ground. You were deemed to have spent a life of too much frivolity, too many worldly jokes, and not enough solemn prayers. You lived on the fringes of society, and so you shall rest on the fringes of eternity. You lived for their laughter. You measured your own worth in their fleeting moments of joy. But laughter is like smoke. It echoes once and then vanishes into the air. And when you are finally gone, the halls of the castle grow quiet only for a moment, until the next fool arrives, juggling and tumbling for their applause. So yes, your life brought others cheer. You made kings forget their worries, and proud lords drop their guards. But when your own candle finally burns out, there is no crowd, no fanfare, no tears. There is just silence. And maybe, just maybe, the soft, imagined jingle of bells, remembered by absolutely no one. To the lords and ladies of the medieval court, the jester was simple entertainment. He was comic relief in a tense world of politics, war, and rigid ceremony. But if you look closer into the shadows he occupied, you will see that the jester was not just there to amuse. He was there to remind. He was a walking, jingling contradiction. Low-born, yet allowed to mock kings. Powerless, yet speaking truth to power. Ridiculed by all, yet secretly feared by many. He stood at the center of the feast, not to be celebrated, but to be studied, because the jester, in his strange and lonely role, was a mirror. His jokes revealed the uncomfortable truths no one else dared to say. His puns disguised sharp political commentary. His mimicry exposed the hypocrisy of the pious and the powerful. And every single time he made the room roar with laughter, he also made it squirm, just a little, because somewhere deep within the slapstick, there was always a sliver of truth. The fool was safe to laugh at until he wasn't, until his insights pointed too directly at a fault, until the court suddenly realized that this strange man in bells and rags understood them better than they would ever like to admit, and so he became more than a mere performer. He became a symbol, a living reminder that power is fragile, that truth, even when dressed in comedy, can be dangerous, and that laughter itself is a weapon, one that can often cut deeper and truer than any sword. In a world completely obsessed with order and hierarchy, the jester was the wild card, the one living exception to every rule, and that is what made him so utterly necessary. He walked the halls of power, not because he was respected, but because he reminded the powerful of what they feared most: being seen as ridiculous, being exposed, being human. But the final joke, in the end, was never truly on the nobles. It was on him. He sacrificed his dignity, his freedom, his legacy, and his own peace of mind for the fleeting, conditional approval of people who would never see him as an equal. His genius was hidden beneath a mask of absurdity. His wisdom was wrapped in playful wordplay, and his truth was ultimately dismissed as foolishness. And yet, centuries later, we still remember him, not as a simple clown, but as something more complex, more haunting, more real. the medieval jester was not a joke. He was a warning that sometimes the only one telling the truth is the one you are too busy laughing at to listen to. Long before the jester's bells echoed in stone halls, and long before curtains rose and actors bowed, a different kind of performance was born in a swirl of wine, masks, and divine chaos. Ancient theater did not begin with polished playwrights or polite applause. It began with Dionysus, the Greek god of wine, fertility, ritual madness, and ecstatic performance. In 6th century BCE, Athens, theater was not just culture, it was a cult. The earliest dramas emerged during the city Dionysia, a massive spring festival held to honor the god himself. Citizens flooded the city in a state of celebration. Livestock was sacrificed in the streets, and wine flowed like rivers. And in the midst of this citywide revelry, something miraculous happened. People started acting, not merely pretending, but becoming, taking on voices that were not their own, dancing in frenzied circles, and chanting choruses that blurred the line between prayer and performance. The centerpiece of this ancient festival was a performance known as the dithyramb. This was not a play as we would recognize it today. It was a wild, hymn-like chant, performed by a large chorus of up to 50 men, all moving in rhythmic, synchronized motion. Their faces were obscured by masks, their eyes perhaps wide with a kind of ecstatic energy. These were not actors in our modern sense. They were vessels, mediums, each individual voice, just one drop in the great divine pool of Dionysian energy. Their goal was not to entertain, but to channel the god himself. Then, according to legend, came a man named Thespis. The story goes that around the year 534 BCE, during one of these very festivals, Thespis did something unprecedented. He stepped out from the chorus and spoke to them, not as a narrator or a member of the group, but as an individual character. Just like that, in one revolutionary moment, the concept of an actor was born. It is from his name, Thespis, that we still get the word thespian to describe performers today. Imagine it for a moment. In a culture where performance was a collective religious act, one man suddenly stood alone on a stage, claiming to be someone else entirely. It must have felt like an act of blasphemy, or perhaps pure magic. The audience, the people of Athens, were hooked. What had begun as a sacred ritual was now rapidly evolving into a structured performance, a new art form taking its very first breaths. Playwrights like Aeschylus and Sophocles would soon come to refine this new form even further. They would add a second and then a third actor, allowing for true dialogue, for plot, and for the fundamental idea of dramatic conflict. But the spiritual core of the performance, its deep connection to the gods and to ritual, never truly left. Theater was born from the temple, and it would carry that sacred DNA for centuries. These early performances took place in massive open-air theaters that were carved directly into the hillsides. Most famously, the Theater of Dionysus, on the southern slope of the Acropolis in Athens. It was a breathtaking sight, a testament to how seriously the Greeks took this new art form. The structure was designed to hold a staggering number of people, with stone seats arranged in a great semicircle around a central, circular stage. This was not an intimate venue. The Theater of Dionysus could hold up to 17,000 spectators at a time. The entire city would gather to witness these performances, which were seen as a crucial part of their civic and religious life. Rich and poor alike would sit side by side on the stone benches. all gathered together to witness something that gracefully straddled the line between religion, art, and public duty. So, no, theater did not start in the quiet darkness of a modern playhouse. It arrived loud, masked, drenched in wine, and fueled by the power of the gods. The stage was not just a place to pretend for a few hours. It was a portal, a sacred space where audiences could connect with myth, with madness, and with a search for profound meaning. And it all started with the collective human need to celebrate something far bigger than ourselves. Welcome back to the stage. As Greek theater matured, it became something more than just divine devotion. It became a mirror, a great polished mirror through which the citizens of Athens could see their own fears, their own failures, and their own fleeting moments of glory, all reflected back at them under the warm Mediterranean sun. But to truly understand that mirror, we have to talk about two things that were central to its power: tragedy and the masks the actors wore. Tragedy, or tragoidia, which literally translates to goat song, is a word that still echoes in our modern storytelling. But its origins are hazy and wonderfully strange. The name might refer to the goats that were sacrificed to the god Dionysus before the performances, or perhaps the prize, a single goat, that was awarded to the writer of the best play. Either way, by the 5th century BCE, tragedy had crystallized into a formal, powerful, and deeply respected art form. The plays themselves were highly structured, poetic, and overwhelmingly fatalistic. Think of the great themes that still haunt us today: inescapable fate, bitter betrayal, bloody vengeance, the arrogance of hubris, and the whims of powerful gods who often toyed with mortals like cats playing with mice. These were not stories with simple, happy endings. They were deep explorations of human suffering and the limits of our reason. And at the very center of it all were the masks. Greek actors did not just play roles. They underwent a total transformation, and the mask was the key. Each actor, who was typically male, could portray multiple characters: men, women, gods, and kings, simply by switching between distinct, stylized masks. A mouth twisted into a permanent grimace for sorrow, a face with wide, startled eyes for fear, a serene and delicate feminine mask for goddesses and queens. These masks were not subtle. They were oversized, with exaggerated features, designed so that even the person sitting in the worst seats, at the very top of the massive amphitheater, could clearly see and feel the character's core emotion. Behind the mask, the actor's voice was everything. Projection and clarity mattered far more than quiet naturalism. With no microphones or complex lighting, these actors had to command a sea of thousands of spectators using nothing but their breath, their tone, and their precise, deliberate physicality. The great tragedians like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides revolutionized the form. Aeschylus is credited with adding a second actor, allowing for true dialogue. Sophocles added a third, creating more complex plots. And Euripides brought a raw psychological depth and an emotional realism that made his characters feel like they could truly bleed, both on the page and on the stage. Their plays, Oedipus, Antigone, Medea, were not just plays. They were philosophical battlegrounds. And yet, despite all this darkness and doom, Greek theater was not a funeral. It was a civic celebration. The tragedies were performed competitively, like the Olympic Games, but for the soul. The entire city would attend, including the poor, whose tickets were often subsidized. Wealthy citizens would even pay for the training of the chorus and the production of the plays as a form of public service. The stage had become sacred ground, and the mask had become a tool of profound revelation. The Greeks had found a way to stare directly into chaos and to call it art. While Greek tragedy grappled with the heavy questions of gods and doom, Greek comedy pulled down its tunic and mooned the universe. By the late 5th century BC, as Athens blossomed into a cultural and intellectual superpower, comedy emerged as tragedy's rebellious younger sibling. It was raw, it was irreverent, and it was wonderfully, unapologetically loud. It was a theatrical playground where no one, not even the mighty gods on Mount Olympus, was safe from being ridiculed. If tragedy solemnly asked, "What is the meaning of our suffering?" comedy cheekily replied, "And why is Zeus such a pompous idiot?" The undisputed master of this satirical art form was Aristophanes, who could be considered the Shakespeare of ancient satire. His plays, like Lysistrata, The Clouds, and The Frogs, were brilliant, bawdy, and bitingly funny. They were packed with social commentary that still feels sharp today. His play, Lysistrata, for example, tells the story of the women of Greece, who decide to withhold all sexual relations from their husbands in order to force the men to stop waging their endless, pointless wars. Imagine watching a play like this in ancient Athens. It was revolutionary, it was hilarious, and it was politically loaded. You would be sitting in an audience where the characters on stage were openly making fun of your government, your neighbors, and your own bad habits, and everyone was laughing together, out in the open. These comedy plays were still a part of the major religious festivals, like the city Dionysia, and were often performed right after the tragic trilogies. This created a stunning emotional experience for the audience. They would go from weeping over the fate of Antigone to roaring with laughter, as a chorus of dancing sausages appeared on stage to mock corrupt local politicians. It was a full spectrum of human emotion, all presented in a single day. The masks used in comedy were even more exaggerated and grotesque than those in tragedy. They depicted foolish faces with bulging eyes, snub noses, and enormous, gaping mouths to guarantee laughter, even from the people in the very back row. The costumes were often heavily padded to make the actors look comically overweight or misshapen. The wigs were wild and unkempt, and the chorus might show up dressed as giant frogs, buzzing wasps, birds, or even literal clouds, depending on the central joke of the play. But Greek comedy was not all slapstick and foolishness. It was deeply and profoundly political. Aristophanes attacked warmongering generals, pretentious philosophers, and rival playwrights with a surgical precision that was both funny and fierce. His play, The Clouds, famously mocked the philosopher Socrates so ruthlessly that some scholars believe it actually contributed to the public mistrust that eventually led to Socrates' real-life trial and execution. As the classical age matured, comedy began to evolve. A later form, known as New Comedy, which emerged in the 4th century BCE, softened the sharp political satire and focused more on domestic plots, stories of mistaken identities, complicated romantic entanglements, and clever slaves who constantly outwitted their dim-witted masters became popular. Playwrights like Menander laid the groundwork for what would later influence Roman comedies and even the structure of modern sitcoms. Greek comedy was more than just laughter. It was truth-telling in disguise. It was a democratic city speaking to itself in a language of riddles and punchlines, of masks and music, of dance and defiance. Where tragedy asked, "What is our fate?" comedy simply replied, "Isn't it ridiculous how we all try to control it?" When the Romans inherited the stage from the Greeks, they did not whisper tragedy into the wind. They built colossal amphitheaters, stuffed them with thousands of rowdy spectators, and essentially said, "Let's make it louder." Theater in ancient Rome was never just about art. It was about power, it was about performance, and most of all, it was about pleasing the masses with a spectacle they would never forget. The earliest Roman plays were direct translations, or, more accurately, adaptations of Greek works. Playwrights like Plautus and his successor, Terence, took the domestic plots of Greek New Comedy and Romanized the humor. They dialed up the physical gags, simplified the storylines for a wider appeal, and created a style of theater that was fast-paced, rowdy, and obsessed with mistaken identities, lewd jokes, and ridiculous characters who always seemed to end up running in frantic circles. Plautus and Terence are remembered for refining Roman comedy, turning it into a beloved genre filled with stock characters that would become templates for Western comedy for centuries to come. The clever slave who was always 10 steps ahead of his master, the clueless young lovers, the perpetually angry fathers in crisis. These figures populated the Roman stage. Their plays did not just entertain. They gently poked fun at the absurdities of Roman society, like snobbery, greed, social climbing, and hypocrisy. Roman tragedy, however, was a very different beast. While Greek tragedies were philosophical, poetic, and focused on grand moral questions, Roman tragedies, especially those written by the philosopher Seneca, were intense, violent, and sometimes downright disturbing. Seneca's play Thyestes, for example, features a climactic scene where a man is tricked into unknowingly eating his own children at a banquet. This was not a night of light, thoughtful entertainment. Seneca's influence, however, would not truly peak until many centuries later during the Renaissance. In his own time, Roman tragedy always played second fiddle to what the public truly craved: spectacle. The Romans loved blood, they loved noise, and they loved grandeur. Theater in Rome often had to compete for public attention with brutal gladiator fights and thrilling chariot races. So playwrights and producers had to constantly up the drama, quite literally. The staging for these productions became incredibly lavish. Some productions featured complex trapdoors, cranes to lift actors into the air as if they were gods, and even elaborate water effects to simulate naval battles on stage. Music was everywhere, a constant and often deafening backdrop that could sometimes drown out the dialogue entirely. Actors still wore masks similar to the Greeks, but their performances leaned more on exaggerated gestures than on nuanced vocal emotion. And in some of the most extreme cases, the deaths you saw on stage were not acted at all. They were real executions of condemned criminals, woven directly into the story for the thrill of the crowd. That is Rome for you. For the emperors, the theater also became a powerful tool of propaganda. Rulers like Augustus and Nero used plays to promote imperial ideology. Nero, in fact, fancied himself a great actor and would force audiences to sit through his endless, terrible performances, or risk being executed for trying to walk out. In Rome, the stage had become a battleground for attention, for glory, and for influence. It was far less sacred than Greek theater, but infinitely more sensational. The goal was no longer spiritual catharsis for the audience. The goal was control. Far from the sun-bleached marble stages of Greece and the booming, blood-soaked arenas of Rome, A completely different form of theater was blossoming in ancient India. This was a tradition rich in spirituality, steeped in philosophy, and defined by a refined, almost delicate sense of aesthetics. Indian theater was not born in festivals of wine and chaos, but in the quiet, meditative depths of sacred texts and ancient oral traditions. Its foundation lies in a remarkable text, the Natya Shastra. This is an ancient Sanskrit treatise on the performing arts. Attributed to the sage Bharata Muni and dated somewhere between 200 BCE and 200 CE, this text was not just a simple manual on how to put on a play. It was a cosmic blueprint, a spiritual guide to the very nature of performance. According to the text, theater was not a human invention at all. It was created by the gods as a divine offering to humanity. It was meant to be a way to educate, to entertain, and, most importantly, to spiritually uplift the soul of the audience. The stage was not just a stage, it was a sacred space, a temple in its own right. The Natya Shastra outlines everything from stage construction and character types to the subtlest of gestures and facial expressions. But its most important contribution is the concept of rasa. Rasa can be translated as the emotional essence, the aesthetic flavor that is evoked in the audience. Whether it is Shringara, romantic love, Karuna, compassion, or sadness, or Rudra, fury, each play was carefully crafted to stir these specific emotional states in the soul of the viewer, guiding them toward a state of heightened awareness or even enlightenment. The performances themselves were elaborate yet incredibly disciplined. Actors would train for years, mastering not only their voice and body, but also the art of mudras. These are a complex system of codified hand gestures used to express specific ideas or objects without needing to speak a word. The dialogue was often sung or chanted, and the stories were drawn from the great epic texts like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, weaving together mythology, morality, and magic into a seamless whole. One of the earliest and most celebrated playwrights was Kalidasa, whose drama Shakuntala still stands today as a masterpiece of world literature. His works were not just popular, they were revered. Audiences came to the theater expecting to be moved, both emotionally and spiritually. They came not just for a story, but for a refined experience of being, a taste of the divine. Theater in ancient India was also inclusive in a very different sense. While the elite royal courts often sponsored grand Sanskrit performances, vibrant folk traditions also flourished alongside them. There was regional village drama, dazzling puppet theater, and powerful dance drama forms like Kathakali and Yakshagana, each with its own unique rules, costumes, and musical rhythms. Unlike in Rome, where the ultimate goal was spectacle, or in Greece, where the aim was civic reflection, ancient Indian theater sought to harmonize. It aimed to create a perfect balance between emotion, intellect, and spirit. It was both performance and prayer, art and dharma. In this world of shimmering silks, fragrant incense, and layered symbolism, the actor was not just an entertainer. They were a spiritual vessel, bridging the gap between the mythical and the real, and embodying the timeless stories that made sense of life and death. In ancient China, theater did not erupt into existence with a sudden burst of creative energy. Instead, it unfolded slowly and gracefully, like a delicate, painted fan, over thousands of years of music, dance, and solemn ritual. Long before there were scripts, stages, and professional actors, there were shamans, court performers and sacred ceremonies that blended elegant movement with profound meaning. The roots of Chinese theatrical traditions stretch back over 3,000 years to the ancient Zhou dynasty. Here, masked dances, known as nuo, were performed, not for an audience seeking entertainment, but as a solemn spiritual affair. These were rituals, conducted by shamans, designed to ward off evil spirits and appease the ancestors. They were not for laughs. They were for the survival and purity of the community. Over time, these ancient rituals began to evolve, slowly absorbing elements of storytelling, mime, and music. By the time of the Tang dynasty, from the 7th to the 10th centuries CE, a true theatrical form was beginning to take shape, one that sought to balance refined aesthetics, strict discipline, and deep philosophy. The Tang court, under Emperor Xuanzong, even established the Pear Garden, the very first known royal acting and music academy in history. Actors trained rigorously in voice, dance, acrobatics, and gesture. It is no wonder that even today, performers in traditional Chinese theater are still respectfully called children of the Pear Garden. But it was during the Yuan dynasty, in the 13th and 14th centuries, that Chinese drama truly bloomed. Under Mongol rule, some of the strict Confucian censorship was loosened, and popular entertainment surged in popularity. A genre of poetic drama known as zayu rose to prominence. It featured a highly structured format with 4 acts, formal arias or songs, comedic interludes, and, remarkably for the time, strong female lead characters, who were sometimes even played by actual women, a true rarity in global theater history. During this period lived Guan Hanking, a Yuan playwright who is often compared to Shakespeare for his skill and influence. His works, like the famous tragedy The Injustice to Do-yi, were packed with emotional depth, sharp social critique, and a lyrical, poetic beauty. These performances relied heavily on symbolic gestures, stylized movements, and minimal scenery, expecting the audience to read the actor's body just as much as they heard their words. From these ancient roots, the dazzling tradition of Chinese opera began to grow, emerging fully by the time of the Ming and Qing dynasties. The most famous of these forms, Peking opera, or Jingju, crystallized in the 18th century. It is a breathtaking art form with incredibly ornate costumes, symbolic, color-coded makeup, spectacular martial arts, and piercing, otherworldly falsetto voices. Peking opera turned performance into a ritualized visual language. Every single movement, the raising of a sleeve, the tilting of the head, the flick of a fan, was loaded with specific meaning. The stage itself was often almost completely bare, perhaps with just a table and 2 chairs. Yet, through the power of performance and symbolism, the audience's imagination was expected to fill that empty space with vast mountains, opulent palaces, and chaotic battlefields. And unlike Western theater, which often strived for realism, Chinese opera aimed for essence. It did not just tell stories. It sought to transmit cultural values, to preserve history, and to express a worldview where heaven, earth, and humanity all danced together in a quiet, cosmic harmony. In Japan, theater emerged not with the clamor of the Roman arena or the dazzling color of Chinese opera, but with stillness, subtlety, and a sense of sacred restraint. Among the world's oldest surviving theatrical forms, no theater is unlike anything that came before or after it. Born in the 14th century, No was less a performance for the masses, and more a quiet ritual for the refined soul. a whisper of drama in a world that was becoming increasingly obsessed with noise. No traces its direct lineage to earlier folk traditions like Dengaku and Surugaku. These were a collection of rustic folk dances, solemn Buddhist chants, and light-hearted comic sketches that entertained both commoners and monks in medieval Japan. But in the 1300s, a remarkable father-son duo changed everything. A man named Kanami and his brilliant son, Zemi, took these scattered folk elements and elevated them into a structured, poetic, and deeply symbolic art form. It was Zemi, a gifted performer, writer, and theorist, who truly gave No its heart. In his famous treatises on the art of performance, he laid down a philosophy of beauty rooted in the concept of yugen. Yugen is a difficult word to translate, but it suggests a kind of mysterious grace, a profound and subtle beauty that is felt more than it is seen. In the world of No theater, less was not just more. Less was everything. Each performance blends music, dance, poetry, and drama into a single, fluid, and meditative expression. The actors move with an extreme slowness, a deliberate weight, often appearing more like living statues than dynamic performers. The dialogue is not spoken, but is instead sung or chanted in a hypnotic, rhythmic way, accompanied by a small, sparse ensemble of a single flute and 2 or 3 drums. There is no illusion of realism here. Instead, the entire experience is dreamlike, almost like witnessing a ghost story being told from within the ghost itself. And speaking of ghosts, many No plays are quite literally about spirits. The main characters are frequently the ghosts of dead warriors, the spirits of lost lovers, the apparitions of mad women, and the souls of wandering monks. These are not action-packed stories with complex plots. They are quiet, powerful meditations on memory, on loss, and on a deep, spiritual longing for release or understanding. The main actor, known as the Shite, typically wears a small, carved wooden mask. These masks are masterpieces of minimalist art, often frozen in a single, neutral expression that seems to shift subtly between joy and sorrow, depending on the angle of the actor's head or the way the light falls upon it. These masks are considered sacred objects, not mere props. The No stage is famously minimal, consisting of just a bare, polished wooden platform with a simple roof, and a painted image of a single, ancient pine tree on the backdrop. Yet this simplicity is deceptive. Every single element, from the deliberate, shuffling walk of the actors' feet to the quiet rustle of their magnificent silk robes, is precisely choreographed to evoke the spiritual world that lies just beneath the surface of our own. Supported and patronized by the powerful samurai class, No became a distinctly aristocratic art form. It was not created for cheering crowds. It was made for quiet introspection, for a connection to something eternal. Even today, No performances remain largely unchanged from how they were performed over 600 years ago. In No, the stage becomes a threshold between worlds, a place where life and death, form and void, voice and silence can meet. While grand stages and noble masked actors often stole the spotlight in many cultures, another kind of theater quietly thrived in the shadows. This was the world of puppet theater. In Asia especially, puppetry was never just simple child's play. It was a powerful and sophisticated medium for exploring myth, for teaching morality, and for preserving collective memory. It was a world where the inanimate whispered truths that the living often dared not say aloud. In Indonesia, particularly on the islands of Java and Bali, The ancient art of wayang kulit, or shadow puppetry, emerged as a sacred and mesmerizing tradition. The puppets are not three-dimensional dolls, but thin, flat figures, intricately carved and painted, made from cured buffalo hide. During a performance, they are held up behind a large white screen, illuminated from behind by a single flickering oil lamp. The result is a hauntingly beautiful display of silhouettes, dancing and fighting in the flickering light, conjuring entire worlds from nothing but shadow. At the very center of it all is the Daling, the puppet master. The Daling is far more than a simple performer. He is a spiritual guide, a comedian, a narrator, and a philosopher, all rolled into one. With a single, versatile voice, he portrays dozens of different characters from the great Hindu epics like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. The stories might last for hours, sometimes stretching through the entire night, accompanied by the hypnotic, rhythmic pulse of a gamelan orchestra. Wayang was not just entertainment, it was a ritual act, often performed during temple festivals, births, funerals, or important political ceremonies. Meanwhile, in Japan, another remarkable form of puppet theater evolved, bunraku. Unlike the ethereal silhouettes of wayang, bunraku puppets are large, heavy, and startlingly lifelike. They are manipulated not by hidden strings or sticks, but by three highly trained puppeteers who are in full view of the audience, dressed completely in black. One puppeteer, the master, controls the head and the right arm. Another controls the left arm, and a third, the junior member of the team, controls the legs. It takes decades of grueling training before a puppeteer is even allowed to touch the puppet's head. The result of this intense discipline is an uncanny, mesmerizing realism. You can see a puppet woman tug her sleeve in a gesture of pure heartbreak, or a mighty warrior tremble with rage before his final battle. The narration for the play, however, is delivered by a single, powerful chanter, the Teiyu, who is seated on the side of the stage beside a musician playing a three-stringed instrument called a shamisen. The puppets may move, but the soul of the performance comes directly from the Teiyu's throat. His voice becomes thunder, tears, whispers, and rage. It is a breathtaking division of labor, where the body and the voice of a character are brought to life by four different people working in perfect harmony. Puppetry thrived in these cultures precisely because it could say and do what human actors often could not. In strict, hierarchical societies, puppets could mock emperors, they could question fate, and they could explore themes of forbidden love or vengeance without direct retribution. After all, it was not a man accusing the king, it was just a doll. Whether in flickering shadows or under the full light of the stage, puppet theater turned wood, hide, and string into profound mirrors, reflecting the deepest fears, dreams, and truths of the cultures that created them. From the drunken chants for Dionysus to the silent, graceful glide of a no-spirit, the forms of ancient theater did not simply vanish with the empires that created them. They echoed forward, their influence reshaping how we tell stories even to this day. Their legacy is not just etched in the stone ruins of amphitheaters or written on dusty, forgotten scrolls. It is alive, breathing in every stage, every screen, and every script we encounter. The Greeks, for instance, gave us the very bones of modern storytelling. Their innovations, dialogue, dramatic conflict, and the idea of a character arc are the fundamental structures upon which nearly all Western narratives are built. The classic three-act play, that is the ghost of Aeschylus whispering through time. The concept of a tragic hero, a great man undone by his own fatal flaw or hubris, that comes directly from the mind of Sophocles. The Romans, for all their love of pure spectacle, passed down a different but equally powerful inheritance: theater as mass entertainment. Their colossal open-air amphitheaters became the architectural model for everything from Shakespeare's Globe Theatre to modern sports arenas, and their popular comedies, full of farce, mistaken identities, and bawdy misunderstandings, laid the essential groundwork for centuries of Western sitcoms and slapstick humor. In the East, the impact of these ancient forms is no less profound. Indian drama, with its deep focus on emotional resonance and the balance of aesthetic moods, or rasa, influenced not just performance, but classical dance, poetry, and the very fabric of Indian cinema. The philosophical weight of the ancient Natya Shastra continues to inform and enrich Indian storytelling today. Chinese opera, with its stunning color-coded symbolism and its stylized rhythmic expression, inspired centuries of visual storytelling. Even the high-energy, choreographed combat of modern martial arts cinema owes a great debt to the traditions of opera performers. Meanwhile, Japan's minimalist and meditative No and Bunraku theaters remain living traditions, still performed and revered, their focus on subtlety influencing modern film directors and experimental theater artists across the globe. And what of the puppets? They have multiplied. From the shadow plays of Southeast Asia to the digital avatars on our phone screens, the ancient idea of animating the inanimate remains as irresistible as ever. Puppetry's unique ability to distill complex emotion into pure, simple gesture has influenced everything from beloved children's television to avant-garde performance art. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of all ancient theater is this: the simple, fundamental human need to perform, to watch, and to be watched. The need to slip into another's skin for a short while, and to return to our own lives somehow changed by the experience. Every ritual, every campfire story, every dramatic monologue delivered on a dimly lit stage is part of that same unbroken lineage, a timeless search for meaning through motion, mask, and voice. So the next time you watch a play, see a film, or even scroll through a dramatic skit on your phone, take a moment to remember. You are witnessing not just a piece of entertainment, but a sacred echo from the past. The technology may have evolved, but the art form has never stopped being our oldest and most honest mirror. Cynane was born into a world where bloodlines were everything, and hers was as sharp as a newly forged sword. Her father was the formidable Philip II of Macedon, the brilliant one-eyed king who transformed a fractured backwater kingdom into a terrifying military machine that would conquer Greece. Her mother was Odata, an Illyrian princess from a fierce warrior tribe to the west, a woman of unyielding spirit. Most Macedonian princesses of the era were groomed for quiet, strategic alliances and a life of silk-draped diplomacy. They were political assets, to be married off to secure borders and pacify rival kingdoms. But Cynane, from the very beginning, was raised for war. From the moment she could walk, she lived under the immense weight of two powerful legacies: the tactical genius of her Macedonian father and the unbreakable, martial spirit of her Illyrian mother. While the other royal girls in the palace were learning how to weave tapestries, Cynane was learning how to properly wield a spear. While they studied poetry, she studied battlefield formations. Her mother, Odata, unlike most Macedonian queens, did not just tolerate this unusual education. She actively encouraged it. training her daughter herself. In Illyrian culture, women could, and often did, fight alongside men. Strength was not just a masculine trait to be admired from afar. It was a virtue expected of everyone. Cynane's early life was therefore steeped in a harsh and relentless discipline. She learned to ride horses across the jagged, unforgiving terrain of the Macedonian highlands. She practiced her swordplay in the blistering heat of the day, and studied the fluid movements of armies instead of the delicate steps of courtly dances. In the palace of Aigai, where her father plotted his great conquests, Cynane absorbed everything. She listened quietly at the edges of war councils, watched how seasoned generals deferred to Philip's commands, and understood, far too early for a child, that true power was never given. It had to be taken. Being Philip's daughter came with immense advantages, but also with constant danger. Her younger half-brother, Alexander, born to the ambitious Queen Olympias, would soon become the undeniable center of Philip's world. The court buzzed with whispered rivalries, hidden ambitions, and a deep, simmering suspicion. Macedon was not a peaceful place, even at the height of its power. Assassinations, exiles, and shifting alliances were the norm. This was the world of her childhood, but Cynane was no passive observer in this dangerous game. Even as a young girl, she began to cultivate a formidable presence. She trained harder than the boys. She spoke more boldly than the other princesses, and she rode faster than the royal squires. She knew her name would never be Alexander, a name destined for legend. But she was fiercely determined to carve her own legacy in the cracks between empires. By the time she reached her teenage years, she was not just admired for her beauty or her lineage. She was feared. She was feared not only for her royal blood, but for her startling, unwavering refusal to fit the mold of a traditional royal woman. She was not a pawn to be played in the political games of men. She was a blade, being sharpened in the shadows. Cynane was born in a palace, raised on horseback, and, in a way, baptized in steel. She was not meant to simply survive in a man's world. She was meant to conquer it. To be born royal in ancient Macedon was to be born into a dangerous game of strategy. But to be born the half-sister of Alexander the Great, that was a life spent balancing on the sharp edge of a dagger. Cynane and Alexander shared the same legendary father, Philip II, but their paths were shaped by very different mothers. His mother, Olympias, was infamous throughout the ancient world for her fierce ambition, her political cunning, and her rumored ruthlessness. Cynane's mother, Odata, was Illyrian royalty, as tough and unyielding as the mountain tribes she hailed from. From her earliest childhood, Cynane knew she would never be the heir. That title, that destiny, had already been handed to Alexander. He was the golden boy, the prodigy with the lion's mane for hair, and the world's greatest philosopher, Aristotle, for a tutor. The royal court adored him, the grizzled generals of the army respected him, and the world, one day, would kneel before him. But Cynane did not kneel. As Alexander grew into the towering legend we now remember, Cynane carved a quieter, but in many ways, a much sharper path for herself. While he rode east into Persia on his grand quest for conquest and glory, she remained behind in Macedon. She was not idle. She was observing, watching how the gears of empire functioned from within. She saw how alliances could shift like desert sands, and how one wrong word, whispered in the right ear, could bring an entire dynasty to its knees. She was learning that the real battlefield was not always fought with swords. Sometimes it was fought in whispers. Still, she was no cloistered, passive noblewoman. Cynane's reputation as a warrior, first nurtured by her mother, began to circulate on its own merit. Rumors of her exceptional military prowess, her unmatched ability to ride, fight, and lead, echoed in the stone corridors of power. She may not have been crossing deserts or storming great cities like her brother, but in the minds of many, she was no less dangerous. She had something that Alexander, in his whirlwind of conquest, never did: silence. He needed the world to watch his every move. His legend was built on spectacle. Cynane, on the other hand, needed them to underestimate her. Her power grew not in the spotlight, but in the shadows cast by her brother's colossal fame. But in a kingdom obsessed with lineage and legitimacy, blood was the ultimate currency, and Cynane had plenty of it. She was not only the daughter of the revered Philip II, but also the sister of the living king. Furthermore, her Illyrian bloodline connected her directly to another formidable branch of warriors, a connection that could be used to unite kingdoms or to break them apart. She did not challenge Alexander, not directly. There was no open battle for power between them, but her very presence, her undeniable lineage, and her proven skill were a constant, quiet threat. She was a reminder to everyone that power in Macedon did not belong only to men, and that the blood of Philip ran in more than one person's veins. And so, as Alexander the Great marched ever eastward, chasing a destiny of immortality, Cynane stayed behind, watching the great gears of empire turn, waiting and studying, because she knew that even the greatest shadow in the world cannot cover everything, not forever. Cynane was not content with simply being a figure of quiet, simmering potential. While others may have been satisfied to live off the reflected glory of a famous relative, she was determined to forge her own legend through direct action. While her brother Alexander was busy building a new, sprawling empire abroad, Cynane found her own battlefield right at home. And unlike many royal women of her time, she did not just lead from behind a silk curtain, issuing suggestions. She rode out in full armor, commanded troops directly, and fought on horseback like a seasoned Macedonian general. Her most famous and defining moment came when she personally led a military campaign into Illyria, the very land of her mother. This was not just a symbolic march to her ancestral homeland. Historical sources suggest that Cynane actively commanded her troops. She organized their strategy, and she fought in the heat of combat herself. In an age when even many noblemen often preferred to lead from the rear, the sight of a royal woman charging into battle at the head of an army was both shocking and deeply awe-inspiring. And it was not just for show. She emerged from the campaign victorious. That military victory was not just a flex of her martial skill. It was a profound political declaration. Cynane was staking a claim. She was proving to the world that she was not merely a noblewoman with a sharp mind and a famous name. She was a trained warrior who had now been tested on the field, emerging bloodied but unbroken. The fierce Illyrian blood of her mother had not thinned in the perfumed halls of Macedonian diplomacy. It had only sharpened. By winning this campaign, Cynane did something extraordinary. She carved out a sphere of influence for herself that was entirely independent of her brother's colossal shadow. Alexander might have been the master of the East, but Cynane was building something of her own in the West. Respect, loyalty, and a fearsome reputation that was not tied to anyone else's name. But power is never a comfortable thing in the hands of a woman, especially a woman who does not ask for permission to wield it. Back in the court of Macedon, the nobles and generals murmured amongst themselves. Alexander, still too occupied with conquering the vast Persian and Egyptian empires, did not seem to interfere. But his prolonged absence was creating a fragile power vacuum at home, and Cynane knew exactly how dangerous and how opportune that empty space could become. She was not just a warrior fighting for her own sake anymore. She had a plan now, a strategy that reached far beyond herself. She was a mother, and she intended to pass on her power and secure her family's place in the uncertain future. So, while the men of the world were busy writing history in their own image, Cynane was quietly preparing for the next move. She had tasted command, she had stained her own armor in real combat, and she had won a victory not by her birthright alone, but by her merit. She was no longer just a royal princess. She was a commander, and she was just getting started. For all her victories and warrior spirit, Cynane's most audacious move was not made with a sword, but with a daughter. Her child, Adia, was born from her marriage to Amyntas, for a man who himself had a claim to the throne but possessed little political strength. Their union was strategic, a way for Cynane to weave her bloodline even deeper into the royal web. But Amyntas was soon dead, likely another victim of the relentless political housecleaning of the Macedonian court. Cynane, however, survived. More than that, she saw opportunity in the ashes. She began raising her daughter, Adia, not as a passive princess destined for a quiet, decorative marriage, but as a future queen. From the very beginning, Adia was trained with the same fire and discipline that Cynane had received as a girl. This was a young woman being sharpened like a blade. Cynane personally oversaw her education in rhetoric, leadership, military training, and, most importantly, the brutal art of politics. This was not just about personal legacy. It was about the survival of the kingdom. Cynane had watched the world begin to unravel in Alexander's long absence. The court was divided, the generals were restless, and the question of succession was a constant, unspoken source of tension. Alexander had no legitimate heir, and his vast empire was fragile. The question of who would rule after his death was not just theoretical. It was a ticking bomb. Cynane had a plan. Her daughter Adia would marry Philip Aridius, Alexander's intellectually disabled half-brother, who was considered by many to be next in line for the throne. If Adia became his wife, and Cynane her primary advisor, they would have real, tangible influence over the future of the Macedonian Empire. This was more than ambition. It was a desperate attempt to protect Macedon from being torn apart by the greed of the powerful generals. But this was not a world that was kind to women who made moves like kings. The regents in power, particularly Perdiccas, one of Alexander's most ambitious former generals, saw exactly what was coming. A warrior mother, raising a potential queen who had a legitimate claim to the throne, was far too dangerous to be ignored. As Cynane and Adia traveled across Asia Minor to ensure the marriage happened, they were intercepted by an army led by Perdiccas's own brother, Alcidas. The moment was tense, the outcome chillingly swift. Cynane, though unarmed, stood her ground with regal defiance. But it was too late. The order had already been given. Cynane, daughter of Philip II and sister of Alexander the Great, was assassinated on the road, far from the justice of a court. She died not in the heat of battle, but by cold-blooded betrayal, killed not for any crime, but for the scale of her ambition. What happened next, however, shocked even the hardened Macedonian veterans. The very soldiers who witnessed her murder were reportedly so outraged by the sacrilege of killing Philip's daughter that they rebelled on the spot. So intense was the backlash that Perdiccas was forced to backtrack. In a stunning, ironic twist, he allowed Adia to marry King Aridius. After all, Cynane died, but her strategy, in the most tragic way imaginable, had worked. Her daughter was now Queen of Macedon. The next move was no longer hers to make, but it would be guided by her indomitable spirit. And so our journey through the quiet corridors of history comes to a close for tonight. If you've enjoyed this exploration and want to join us for more stories from the shadows of the past, please remember to subscribe to Medieval Nocturnes. We are grateful for every one of you who chooses to spend your quiet hours with us. Until next time, sleep well.